2023 has been an incredible year for games. Like, we've truly been blessed with some amazing releases this year. And we've also gotten some really terrible games this year. It felt like every month we had a big release coming up. There have been so many good games coming, I've gotten to the point where I just can't keep up anymore. And now at this point, any game I haven't gotten to this year is just going to enter the backlog for next year. Now, I didn't only play games that had released this year, I had also played a bunch of other games in my backlog prior to the amount of major releases this year. Many I was able to make videos off of, and many I wasn't able to get to at all. This video may be my only chance to share my thoughts and inputs on those games. This is going to be my first personal recap video, so let's see how this goes. Without further ado, let's just get into it. Starting off with January. During this month I've got to play two games that I've been meaning to play for a while. Control and Nier Automata. I think what I really liked about Control was all the environments. Control has some really cool set pieces that just really stuck with me. Some cool trippy moments as well. Playing with the powers was fun, gunplay was acceptable. I mean, it's a great game. I really like a lot of Remedy's games. I've played all Max Payne's 1 and 2. I've also played Alan Wake, Quantum Break. Didn't play Crossfire X's campaign. It is probably their one and only bad release. But at the same time, given that game doesn't exist anymore and was removed off the markets, technically they still have a clean record. Remedy makes some really good narrative games. I can say Control is another great game made by them. Wasn't able to play Control back when it launched in 2019 because it just flew past my radar, but better late than never, something I will say a lot throughout this video. Then we have Nier Automata. Sometime in 2022 I had played Nier Replicant for the first time, and that game did leave a good impression on me. Now, I do remember the first half of the game being boring, but the story for the second half of that game did get a lot better, and I was committed enough to beat that game through the end. After beating Replicant, I now wanted to play Automata next. After playing the two, Nier Automata is the game I prefer more than Replicant. One thing I admire about both these Nier games is how the narrative and worlds are fleshed out in both of these games. Added with some really great music is what makes both of these games very immersive. The story of Automata is definitely a story that's going to stick with me, especially when you fully experience most of the endings. It's definitely a game that makes you think. Last game I played in January and also touch each and every other month throughout the year is Vampire Survivors. Best $3 game I've ever bought. I know they raised the price at some point, but I bought it when it was $3. Even at $5, it's definitely worth it. This game just gets straight to the point, easy to get into, so much replayability, highly recommend this. The Dead Space remake did come out in late January. I didn't get it because I just didn't feel like replaying it at the time. Dead Space is a good game. Glad to hear the remake turned out good. I just wasn't in the mood to play it again at the time, that's all. Entering February, I played Shovel Knight Treasure Trove. Shovel Knight has so much charm to it. Game's platforming is fun and rewarding. Using that shovel to bounce off enemies is just so satisfying. Level design is very well thought out. The bosses, the story, the soundtrack was all great. I can't believe it took me so long to play this. Now this is a collection of 4 platformers. The other entries are games within the Shovel Knight's world. Not gonna go too deep into the other campaigns. The other 3 campaigns are good. Spectre Knight has to be my favorite out of the 3, and I think Plague Knight is the weakest out of all of these. Shovel Knight Treasure Trove as a whole is a great collection that I recommend. Next we have Secret Agent Clank. Now I grew up with the PS2 Ratchet & Clank games. Love those games, by the way. I have played most of the games of the franchise. Only games I haven't played yet in the series is Tools of Destruction and Nexus. Don't have intentions on playing All for One or Full Frontal Assault. Secret Agent Clank is a game I wanted to try out. With this game specifically, I already knew what I was getting myself into, so Agent Clank is basically a James Bond parody within the Ratchet & Clank world. In Up Your Arsenal, Clank becomes a movie star where he plays a role of a super spy named Agent Clank. In that game, he was just playing a role, and Secret Agent Clank is basically the movie or episode we get to experience. Now, a game for the PlayStation Portable, this is a very solid game. Plays similar to Size Matters, which also released for the PSP, but this time we have a slight focus on stealth. Ratchet is playable, His section is just a basic arena survival, having to fend off against a certain amount of waves of enemies. And there's also a third playable character in this game, Quark. And honestly, the Quark sections might be the worst part of this whole journey. Overall, this is just an okay game. If you're a fan of the Ratchet & Clank series, you'll find some enjoyment. At the same time, this is just a spin-off that doesn't seem to be canon in any way. Overall, it's okay. That's just how I feel about Secret Agent Clank. Now, around this time, I purchased some retro collections, Contra Anniversary Collection, Castlevania Anniversary Collection, and the Mega Man Legacy Collections. Saw the three of these on sale for a very low price and decided to pick them up. Starting this month with the Contra Collection, really only playing 4 of the games. Contra, Super C, Contra Hardcore, and Contra 3. Really simple and fun games to play. First Contra was good, Super C is better than the first, Hardcore was also good, Contra 3 was also really fun. Solid collection overall. Wasn't even alive when these games came out, but glad these games got a re-release so that I could try them out for the first time. It also just goes to show you, the games may be old, but the fun they offer is timeless. Also played Pizza Tower this month. Did not expect this game to be so good. Really creative and funny platformer. I think it was inspired by the Wario World games. Definitely try that game out. Also in late February, I got one of those emulation handhelds, the Anbernic RG35XX. I paid $60 for this, and I gotta say, for what this thing is capable of, for $60, this thing is amazing. I love it. Very pocketable, can play games from NES to PS1. I did take this device with me when I'm on the go. Unlike the Switch and Steam Deck, this device fits very well in my pocket. I mostly played Game Boy and Game Boy Advance games on it. Only PS1 games I played were racing games like Ridge Racer or CTR. On the Game Boy side, I played games like Pokemon, Sonic Advanced, Mario. I'll list all the games I've played and beaten towards the end of the video. I have used this thing throughout the whole year, and I can say confidently, I really got my money's worth out of this. Going into March, I finally got to playing Hi-Fi Rush, a game I held off playing when it came out. I have never played a game like this, a rhythm action game, where you get rewarded for syncing up your attacks with the music. Executing any of these moves was very satisfying. Level design is neither complex or too simple, it's just right. And not just that, the levels are also synced up with the music. It does help make the setting and the world of the game feel alive. Story is a lot of fun, characters are charming. I guess one thing that does get more difficult are the enemy parry attacks, because the further you get into the game, the quicker their parry rhythm attacks are. But if you find that frustrating, you can dodge this attack to avoid this. On-beat rhythm games aren't my thing. Usually I get bored of them quick, but I never got bored of this one. Hi-Fi Rush is definitely a must-play. Another game I played in March is a game called Toem. Toem is an exploration photography game. It's similar to Pokemon Snap. You explore these levels, completing tasks by taking specific pictures of things around you. It's like a scavenger hunt. This was a small laid-back experience that I thought was easy to get into. I also played the classic Mega Man games. Only played 1 through 3 for this month. A very simple running gun platformer that offers challenging boss fights at the end of each stage. First game was fine, though I do have some negative things to say. One, I don't really like the level design in the first game. The enemy placement also isn't good. Also didn't really utilize the weapon upgrades. Story is very basic, the bosses are okay. Now I'm fully aware that each of the bosses have their own weaknesses that you can exploit, which makes most of these fights a lot easier. Really, the first boss you face is the hardest because you just have your standard blaster. You can pick any stage you like, but I feel like the first stage is usually the hardest no matter who you face. Mega Man 2 basically corrects all the negatives the previous game had. Music is really catchy, level design is better, enemies aren't annoying, boss fights are fun but still challenging. Yeah, Mega Man 2, it's really good. Mega Man 3 is also really good. You have a new slide mechanic, a new character named Rush. Pretty cool. However, the final stage in the third game did drag out a bit by making you fight all the robot masters from Mega Man 2. Didn't really like that. Still a good game. Only played the first 3 of Mega Man games this month because a certain game I was looking forward to released. So I held off the other 3 games until I finished this one game. and that is Resident Evil 4 Remake. The original RE4 is a classic, so expectations for this remake was high, and thankfully they did deliver. Now, one thing I will call out about the RE4 remake that I'm sure others have brought up as well is the cut content. The laser hallway, the throne room, a whole boss fight, and a lot more apparently. It's still a great remake. I'd recommend both the original and remake, but I feel like most people will only pick one. Most people who never played Resident Evil will likely pick the remakes over the original, but I still encourage those people to at least try out the original RE4 game. It still holds up. Moving into April, got back into playing Mega Man 4 through 6. Mega Man 4, while these Mega Man games were good, the staleness was starting to kick in. Not just that, but finding the weaknesses became a little bit confusing. In Mega Man 2 and even 3, finding the boss's weaknesses were pretty easy to understand. Like, Heat's weakness could be Bubble, Woodman's weakness could be Blade or Heat. But when you get to Mega Man 5, you go up against a guy called Gravity Man. How do you figure out Gravity Man's weakness? What's Crystal Man's weakness? Now, these are old games. Obviously, their guides are out there to tell you their weaknesses, but I wanted to play these blind. Games were still fun running gun games. Maybe the reason they felt stale was because I played them all straight, and I was aware this is likely to happen. That's why I took a short break from Mega Man and played RE4 Remake last month. But after beating RE4, I was eager to keep playing the Mega Man series. But I did beat 1 through 6. Moving on from Mega Man, another retro series I wanted to get into was Castlevania. I never played Castlevania. Back then, I never really was interested in Castlevania. But there was one Castlevania game I really wanted to try out, Symphony of the Night. But before I play that game, I wanted to at least try out all the previous games first. I heard I didn't have to, but I wanted to, so that I can better understand this franchise by going back to its roots. So, Castlevania. The story is simple for all of these games. You kill Dracula. Gameplay is simple, just whip enemies along with some platforming. But this game is hard. It's hard. You do have items to help you throughout the game, but I found the items more helpful with the bosses. And you know, that's the two big things that made this game so hard, is the boss fights and the enemy placements. Especially the enemy placements. Boss fights can be figured out through trial and error, but it's so hard to get past enemies to get to the boss fights, especially in the final stage. Beating the game felt satisfying though. Still a great game, a great hardcore NES game. Now, I was aware Castlevania 2 Simon's Quest was bad before playing it. I still gave it a shot because I wanted to experience a bad NES game. Only NES games I've played in my lifetime was Mario and Zelda. So, I tried out Simon's Quest. And yeah, it was bad. So I skipped that. Castlevania 3, game went back to its roots. This time around you have multiple characters to play as. Game is still really hard. And actually this game might be harder than the first game. That might be just how I feel about it. Super Castlevania. Probably the best rendition of the original Castlevania formula. Control scheme is better, game is less frustrating, music slaps, levels stand out. This level was cool. And this one too. Great game. Bloodlines was also alright. Now after playing 5 Castlevania games straight, at this point I decided to take a break from Castlevania. Now these games are short. I think most of them took me less than 2 hours to beat. Super probably took me 3 or more, I can't remember. But I needed a break. Last game I started for this month was Chrono Trigger. I've always wanted to play Chrono Trigger. Never got the chance to play it back then. I also always forget to play it. And now I'm playing it. And pretty much played this throughout the rest of April, all the way to early May. In May, I beaten Chrono Trigger. I don't really play much JRPGs. I'm actually very nitpicky with JRPGs. I don't hate them. No, I actually love most of them. But the thing with these games is that they are long. But Chrono Trigger was a JRPG that I'm glad I played when I could. The music, the great cast of characters, some real-time turn-based combat. I was surprised how easy to understand this game was. Everything is straightforward. The pacing was perfect. Character moments went by quick, but at least they were impactful. Like the frog, for example. We get one single scene to understand why he fights, and it's all we need. Now, I don't think it's the best JRPG I've ever played, but for its time, I totally get it. I am impressed how well this game holds up after so many years. There's 2 other games I played this month, Hypercharged Unboxed and the Crash and Spyro crossover games, and since I've made videos on those games, I'm not gonna go over them again. Final game for this month is Star Wars Jedi Survivor. I really liked Fallen Order. I love Star Wars, and Jedi Survivor does everything that a sequel should do, improve on every aspect that its predecessor did well. However, my biggest problem with this game is, of course, the performance issues, which I think the game is still experiencing today. It really is a shame how buggy this game released. It's a really good game at its core, but sadly many people are going to remember this game for being a broken mess at launch. Bugs aside, the story is really good, levels are great, combat is improved, conflicts are well written. All bugs aside, this is one of my favorite games of this year. In June, I played a lot of indie games this month. Now, majority of the games I've played in June I've done a video on. Reventure, BattleBit Remastered, Clone Drone, Brotato. Not gonna go over them again. I will say this though, I'm glad to see BattleBit Remastered is still going. There is one other game I started playing this month that I didn't get a chance to make a video on, and that's Final Fantasy 16. While I really enjoy the visuals and combat, I think my one problem with this game is its difficulty. The difficulty doesn't change at all throughout the entire game, which is a shame because the combat in this game is good, and I could see them improving on this in future entries. Enemy encounters just have to be better now. I do have some positives about the game. First of all, the music and the boss fights were just grand. They were my favorite parts of this game. Very well done. The story and narrative was fine. But yeah, I mean, that's all I have to say about Final Fantasy 16. I played this from late June all the way to early July. Did beat it through the end. Great game overall. During this time, Armored Core 6 was months away. I had never played an Armored Core game, so I wanted to go back to the franchise's roots. So, I went back and tried out all the PS1 Armored Core games. Now, I've done a video on these games already. Once again, I'm not going to go over any games I've already done a video on. I also played some indie games, which also includes Zero Ranger and Unmetal. But in late July, I did start The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, and played Zelda all the way to early August. Tears of the Kingdom is basically more Breath of the Wild. Now we have 2 more layers added to Hyrule, the Sky Temples and the Underground. I mean, they did change many parts of Hyrule. Some areas have environmental changes, but the map is still the same. Best part of Tears of the Kingdom is without a doubt the fusing mechanic. The new abilities, fusing items with weapons, creating vehicles, all of it is incredible. I also really enjoyed doing all the temples this time around. I find the temples more fun in this game than in Breath of the Wild. Mini bosses added variation, and all the boss fights were fun to fight. There are some negatives, like in Breath of the Wild, weapons can still break easily. That still sucks. Underground Depths was a cool new layer, but honestly I didn't enjoy exploring the depths that much. Constantly lighting the pitch black darkness, and the massive walls that get in your way, forcing you to go elsewhere, was a bit of an annoyance. Now I did solve this by making a vehicle with bright blooms attached to it to solve that issue. But this spark of genius I had didn't last long since I always run into colossal walls to block my path, making me find another way to my objective. I still did get a lot of enjoyment out of this game, definitely in my top 5 for the year. After I beat Tears of the Kingdom, I had my friend group recommend me Baldur's Gate 3. I did get a couple hours into the game, but I decided to put that playthrough at a halt because I knew this was a game I was going to pour tons of hours into. There was still a lot of games coming out this year. This can wait, but I do see the hype around the game. Mid-August, I played a game that I had been wanting to play for a long time. Castlevania Symphony of the Night. Yeah, this did live up to the hype. Incredible sprite work, movement is very fluid. Unlike past Castlevania games, this game is non-linear. There's a whole map to explore, collecting different abilities in order to access new areas. You also have spells, though executing spells is like trying to pull off a Mortal Kombat move. Didn't really use the spells that much. There were 2 sections that felt cryptic, both at the underground parts of the map, but this game is old. A simple guide helped me through it. I did play enough to get 2 endings of this game. Really glad I played the inverted castle part. Glad I didn't stop playing after I got the basic ending. Last game for August is Armored Core 6. Played this all the way to early September. I already covered Armored Core 6, a very casual game compared to other From Software games. It's just Balteus that made everyone sweat. I think it's the dream mech game. Now, September was a stacked month. After I beat Armored Core 6, I discovered a game starring Bruce Willis called Apocalypse for the PS1. Game was incredibly short. I covered this game in a video. It's an interesting game. Next is Starfield. Only played 6 hours of the main story. I decided to drop my playthrough and wait until Bethesda patched the game enough. Maybe wait for potential DLC. I know I didn't get far, but I have heard the main quest line in Starfield was boring. I mean, I'll still give the game a chance when I get back into it once it's patched enough. But it does suck to hear that. After Starfield, Mortal Kombat 1 released, the second or third time this franchise is rebooting. The story was alright, but when you get halfway into the story, this is where I felt like they should have just called this game MK12. Kinda wish they didn't do the whole multiverse crossover thing. It feels like every franchise is following the multiverse trend. It was still entertaining, especially at the end. The fighting is about the same as MK11. A good roster. Invasion mode was cool. Solid game. Although I don't like how they made the store a part of the game. I know exactly where this is going and I'm not happy about it. I hope MK fans don't support whatever is sold on the store. Because look, if we buy into this shit, it's only gonna get worse. And it will severely affect MK2. After MK1, I tried playing Payday 3. Tried to. So, I was only able to play 3 heists of Payday 3. Because this game just didn't work for about 2 weeks. The decision to make Payday 3 an online-only game really damaged this game's reputation at launch. They did confirm an offline patch, but that was an afterthought. We should have been able to play the game offline at launch. This is probably so many people's first time playing a Payday game, and now that they've been left with a bad impression of the game due to all its issues at launch, I don't think those players are going to come back. That's it. The game has to make do with the player base they have left. Payday 3 only launched with 8 heists. At first I thought this would be a case of quality over quantity. Now, I was only able to play 3 heists. They do have some replayability to them. But let's just say this game didn't have any network issues at launch. I probably would have gotten a weekend out of this regardless. I don't know, I'd rather people play Payday 2. That game is a very content-rich game. It did take about 8 to 10 years for Payday 2 to get to that level of content. And how long will it take for Payday 3 to get to that level of content like Payday 2? Most likely another 8 to 10 year wait. If this game lasts in the long run. We'll see. After being let down by Payday 3, last game I played for the month was Turbo Overkill. This is one of those boomer shooters, or Doom-like FPS games. There's a lot of those games now. I think Turbo Overkill is one of the better boomer shooters out there. Movement is very fast paced, might be on par to Titanfall's movement. You have these chainsaw legs, where every time you slide you can kill or damage any enemy in your way, and actually the sliding can be compared to another game called Vanquish. The weapon and skill progression unlocks is wild. You think chainsaw legs are crazy? What if I told you you can unlock chainsaw arms and install micro missiles on your legs? You also have a grapple hook, a slow motion ability, a lot of gore. You also have these hover car and motorbike sections that are a nice change of pace. This whole game is a non-stop thrill ride. It's worth checking out if you're really into these types of shooters. Early October I played Lies of P. Lies of P is a Souls-like inspired by the story of Pinocchio, set in an early dark industrial world where puppets have gone on a rampage. The story is well told by good environmental storytelling and dialogue. Levels are very linear, not much environment variation. There is some drawback on these areas, but the world building of the game is so well done, I didn't really question it that much. The gameplay is complex but very refined. Weapon customization was very interesting. It allows you to switch weapon handles between blades, basically allowing you to create custom weapons that suit your playstyle. You have this arm that can be equipped with a grapple hook or flamethrower or cannon shot or even a shield, and a skill tree. The customization and progression is probably my favorite part of this game. Boss fights are very well designed. They're hard, yes, but they are fair. It's important to pay attention to bosses' attack patterns. Parry window is small, but through my playthrough I never relied on the parry mechanic that much. There are so many different mechanics to this game, most of them being optional. Game is very well balanced. I don't know if I'd say this is the hardest Souls-like game I've ever played. Personally, I think Sekiro is still the hardest. Lies of P is definitely up to From Software's level of quality when it comes to making a Souls-like game. Probably Game of the Year for me. And this game was made by a small team. They did announce DLC and a sequel, which I'm very looking forward to. Coming out of Lies of P was Lords of the Fallen. Wasn't really into this one. Visuals are good, but the game's balancing wasn't really well thought out. I did cover this game already. I mentioned in that video that this game might improve with future patches. Patches still being released today. I'm sure a lot of my complaints are either reworked or completely fixed, but I already had my fill with that game and moved on. Cities Skylines 2 also released this month. I was really looking forward to this game because I really liked the first Cities game. It's one of my favorite city builder management games. And I actually like many of Paradox's games, like Stellaris. Sadly, Cities Skylines 2 didn't launch well. Game just wasn't optimized at all. It could barely run on any system it was on. As of recording this, I think it's still suffering from performance issues. And performance issues aside, apparently the game is missing features the first game had. And I can't believe Paradox thought it was okay to release the game in that state. Really needed more time in the oven. As for the missing features, they'll likely release them through paid expansions like they always do. Not a fan of that, but it is what it is. Maybe I'll purchase the game in about a year or two. It really sucks, because this is one of my most anticipated games for the year. Towards the end of October, Insomniac's Spider-Man 2 released. Solid successor of the first game. Very high quality game. Didn't think they'd be able to improve the web swinging, but they did. It's so much more smoother. Only have two small complaints. One thing I missed from the first game is the gadget wheel, and I also wish they did more in the final act. I am going to talk about the final act for a bit, so spoiler warning. While the final act was cool and all, I kinda wish they did more with it, because this last segment of the game felt rushed. Wish it lasted a little longer. Anyone remember Web of Shadows? How there was symbiote variants of other characters, like Wolverine, Black Cat, Electro, and even Vulture? I feel like Insomniac could have done something similar in this game. Have symbiote versions on some of the villains. But they didn't. Instead, Kraven just killed off the other villains off screen. I think he killed about 3. Didn't like that. It also could have been a good opportunity to feature other Marvel characters. Wasted potential right there. Still a great game. I just felt like the final part of the game felt rushed. In early November, I planned on purchasing Alan Wake 2, but I held off from getting that game after seeing there was no physical release. I was just gonna get the game on PC, but I refused to buy anything on the Epic Games Store. I'm hoping it does get a physical release at some point. It won't, but I'm hopeful. Regardless, I am planning on playing this game with or without a physical release. Also played Ghost Runner 2 this month, solid sequel. After that, I played Beyond Good and Evil for the first time. Immediately from watching the intro cutscene, you get pulled into this mythical sci-fi fantasy world that's so well crafted and has so much personality and charm. You play as a photographer named Jade, who makes a living by recording and documenting creatures. The game's world is currently under war with an evil faction called the Doms. Eventually, Jade gets involved in investigating a conspiracy that might save her home planet. While I really admired the story and setting of this game, the gameplay side I have mixed feelings. Now, the first half of the game felt really slow, but I did put up with it through the end because I was really interested in the game's story. Gameplay mostly focuses on very basic stealth. There's a lot of stealth sections. Combat is also very basic. There's actually not many combat sections. They almost feel forced in a way. Game progression is dependent on these pearls. Best way to collect these pearls is by doing the side content. And the side content is actually the best part of the gameplay aspect of Beyond Good and Evil. They're actually not boring. Some of them are dungeon-like levels, some minigames, races even. The side missions were surprisingly good. The worst part about this game is the camera controls. Camera was something I was constantly fighting with during the stealth sections. The world and storytelling are very well crafted. Game soundtrack also stands out. Unfortunately, I didn't really like the gameplay that much. Last game I played for November is a game called Endling Extinction is Forever. It's one of those atmospheric narrative games. This is hard to talk about without spoiling anything, but you play as a mother fox with 4 cubs, trying to live by as the world around you is destroying itself. If you ever played games like Abzu, Journey, Inside, and Limbo, this game is worth looking into if you played either of those games. At last, December. The last couple games I played this month was Dave the Diver, The Finals, and the full release of Ready or Not. Dave the Diver was a nice relaxing game, exploring the ocean, catching fish, and maintaining a sushi restaurant. There's a nice gameplay loop here. Game also introduces some new mechanics along the way, but I stopped playing it because I got distracted by another game, The Finals. The game is fun. Something I miss in PvP shooters is destructible environments. Something Battlefield used to be known for. The game brings back that feeling, but in a smaller scale. Now, I haven't played a lot of The Finals yet. The game is fun. I don't really like the game modes that much. The game has a lot of potential. It's a refreshing team-based shooter. I'm still playing this from time to time, so I don't really have much to say about it. And the final game I'm currently playing through is the full release of Ready or Not. Ready or Not is the most recent SWAT tactical game, and it might be the best SWAT game out there. I'm amazed on how engaging the AI is in this game. Before the game's 1.0, you essentially had to do everything yourself. You can order your teammates to do stuff for you, but you have to constantly order them. Like restrain hostages, collect evidence, and find objectives. But now your teammates help you out so much with all that. They can restrain hostages and collect evidence on their own now. And also before the game's 1.0, there would be times where the mission won't end because I have to find this one batch of drugs or something. Missions like that still exist, but now my squad can thankfully find some of that stuff for me. Enemy behavior is also improved. But yeah, that's what I'm currently playing as of recording this. And I'm also going to try and continue Baldur's Gate 3. And now we've made it towards the end. This was truly a very stacked year for games. At this point, any game I didn't get a chance to play is now entering the 2024 backlog. I don't know how good or bad next year is going to be. I personally wouldn't mind a bad year of games. I still need to catch up on this year's releases. And who knows, given where the industry is shifting and also all the layoffs that happened this year, this could be the last year of genuine games, before we double down on always online or more live service games. Oh, I hope I'm wrong. Games I'm currently looking forward to are Hades 2, Hollow Knight Silksong, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, hoping for a Metroid Prime 4 update, maybe more as time goes on. As for my game of the year, it has to be Lies of P, since I got a lot of enjoyment out of that, and currently considering doing New Game Plus as of recording this. Second game I'd say is Armored Core 6, and the third may have to be Tears of the Kingdom. I got a lot of enjoyment out of these 3 games. Everyone's game of the year is different. These are my top 3. I know I may have covered a lot of these games fairly quickly. I apologize for that, but I also felt like I shouldn't spend too much time talking about one game while I have more to talk about after. This video would have been really long too. Finally, this is all the games I've played and beaten on that handheld I mentioned in February. Don't know how good or bad things will get next year. I can only hope for the best. With that being said, thank you all so much for watching, and I hope everyone has a good year.